Welcome.
Recording in progress.
Recording is in progress, and we do that so that we can put these events, our in-person and our online events, onto the website and onto our YouTube channel, which still amazes me. We have one of those. And we can then share it with others who are around the world and unable to join at this time. So we love to make sure as many people as possible can be part of it. So I'm going to start today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we all gather today, pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are here today. Always was, always will be Aboriginal land. I'm on the land of the Cammeraygal people of the Eora Nation. And if you'd like to share where you are, please feel free to put that in our chat. It's always good to see the amazing distribution around Australia. So thank you for coming. Our session today is to look at balancing work and family in the aid and development and humanitarian sector. And without a doubt, this is an area that occupies the minds of a lot of women in this sector. And not necessarily right today, but as you progress through, there are quite some challenges in balancing the role, potentially taking time out to look after family, taking time out to look after older parents or sick relatives. So how do we juggle that? And we've got three speakers today who are going to give us their insights and give us a bit of a picture of how you juggle, how you keep the responsibilities both sides working well, but also what organisations can do to make things easier for people, for women who are actually doing that. And let's be honest, men are also doing this too. There are far more men now involved in caring responsibilities. So it does apply for them. And there are a couple of men who've signed up. So fingers crossed they'll be joining us today as well. And we're delighted to also bring this as an online session because we know that a lot of women are unable to come to the face-to-face sessions because of those responsibilities. So we're planning going forward to always have one of these a year. And, you know, as we all learned in COVID, the involvement of children in our Zoom calls is always welcome and enjoyable, and reminds us that we are not single focus humans. We are complete humans, and bringing in all of the aspects is so important. So the plan is I'm going to introduce our speaker, our first speaker. We have three. I'll introduce them as we go. And we will invite you to ask all the questions you may have at the end, unless the speaker decides they're happy to be interrupted. But we'll get them to speak for, it may be 10, 15, 20 minutes, and then we'll go into questions. At the end, we will go into some breakout rooms, because one of our aims as Women in Development is to get a little bit of networking going. And it's really, really hard when we're online. We know that it's not the best, but we've found that a small breakout room with a question that everybody can focus on gives people an opportunity to interact a little bit and to get to know someone that hopefully when you can come along to an event next time, you can actually meet up and chat and talk. So I'm expecting we'll be here till at least 1:15, possibly 1:30, but don't worry, we won't keep you the whole afternoon. So let's get going. I'm going to introduce, first of all, Jen Bell, who is our first speaker. Jen was the People and Organisational Development Director at Fred Hollows for 12 years and left this year to focus on her family and start a consultancy with her husband. At Fred Hollows, she was an integral member of the executive leadership team, accountable for the development and implementation of the organisation's people strategy and effective delivery of its people practices across 22 countries. Jenny is a strong advocate for balancing work and family commitments and led by example, being the first part-time exec leader at the foundation following the birth of her son, and implemented many practices to enable. Can I just ask everybody to mute? That would be really helpful. Oops. Yes, so to balance, enable staff at all levels to balance work and family commitments. So she's a chartered member of the Australian Human Resource Institute, has an executive MBA, Bachelor of Arts in HR Management, and has done the AICD company director course. So let me hand over to Jen.
There we go. Love the online. Is that working now? Fantastic. Just want to thank you for that lovely introduction, Chris. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands of the Dark and Jung people that I'm joining you from today on the beautiful central coast of New South Wales, and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and community. I pay my respects to them and their cultures, and to elders past, present and emerging, and recognise any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples joining us today. So as Chris mentioned, I'm Jen, and I worked at the Fred Hollows Foundation for 12 years, the last 10 years as their People and Organisational Development Director. I'm a mum to 2 kids. My stepdaughter Lily is 12 years old and started high school this year. And my son Link is 8 years old and is in year 3. Link was diagnosed with autism and ADHD 2 years ago, so we also need to coordinate additional therapeutic support along with his other extracurricular activities. Until January this year, my husband, kids and I lived with my parents for 10 years. We lived upstairs and they lived downstairs. And whilst they were relatively self-sufficient, I did need to support more when my mum had cancer and my dad travelled. So I do understand the juggle and challenges of balancing work and family commitments. During my time at the foundation, as Chris mentioned, I was an advocate for driving and encouraging the balance of work and family, and I was in a privileged position to enable change and actively lead by example. So that's actually what I want to chat about today. We implemented a number of great initiatives at the foundation to support our people, who were predominantly women, in managing their work and life commitments, and I'm looking forward to hearing Casey's experiences later. With regard to flexible working, we created a culture of flexible working by focusing on outputs, not inputs. And by this, I mean as long as the work was done, we empowered our people to determine the best way to get it done. And in practice, this took a number of different forms. But importantly, we empowered our managers and leaders to work with their people to determine what work arrangements best fit them and their teams. And it wasn't a one-size-fits-all approach, because everyone's individual circumstances and roles are different. But we had a number of options available. So people could have a formal part-time job share or condensed work week. Condensed week arrangements meant that a person could work their full-time hours over 4 days. But importantly, if someone was on a part-time arrangement and worked on their non-work day, we paid them for it, or we allowed them to take it at a different time that better suited them. Now, whilst it may sound obvious, as leaders, it is important to be conscious of the part-time arrangements within our teams so that we don't organise team meetings or social events on people's days off. And if necessary, and whilst it can be quite time-consuming, When a new arrangement's agreed, team meetings should be reviewed. So, for example, when one of my team returned from parental leave, they moved to a 4-day week with Wednesdays off. And previously, our team meetings were on Wednesdays. So we actually needed to move them to alternating Tuesdays and Thursdays to work around other pre-arranged meetings. But it enabled them to be a full participant in our team. And that was really important. When we organised Sydney office lunches, I asked the team to organise it on a day where most people worked. So, for example, Fridays are never a good day to organise events, as there's quite a few people who didn't or don't work on Fridays. To be truly flexible, though, we allowed our people to determine the hours of work that best fit their circumstances. So this included allowing them to flex their hours so they could take time off during the day to take their kids or parents to appointments, help out in their child's canteen, or even have their hair done. As working mums, we all know that going to a hairdresser can take some time, and having kids around doesn't make that easy. But this was particularly important for those who work closely with our overseas colleagues when the US works early morning Australian time and Africa is late afternoon and evening. So if someone worked with teams in both the US and Africa, it wasn't uncommon for them to take personal time off during the day. We had a home first hybrid approach where we worked from home to do our busy work and have our online Teams meetings, as most of our teams weren't domiciled in the same location. And we found everyone being online enabled everyone's voices to be better heard. It also helped our people balance their personal commitments, as it enabled them to take their kids to school, gave them additional time to exercise or do the washing and chores throughout the day so that they had more free time on their weekends. We had online global all-hands meetings each quarter for all staff, and monthly executive chats where executives would alternate and take turns providing an update or have a chat about a particular topic of interest where staff could ask questions directly. Now, these global meetings and coffee chats were typically held at 4 p.m. Sydney time to allow for the global workforce to participate, and generally coincided with the time that Link normally got peckish. So more often than not, as Chris mentioned earlier, I'd be talking about something with the global team and Link would interrupt saying hi and asking for something to eat. So over time, I learned to have biscuits and a cut apple sitting on my desk so I could quickly respond. But interestingly, people loved his interruptions, as Chris mentioned. And I was told by many people that Link popping in to say hi and me feeding him normalised being a parent and sent the message to the global team that it's okay to prioritise the needs of our kids when they need us. He's around today, so actually you never know, he may pop in to say hi. We came into the office to collaborate on work projects or to socialise. Team meetings, or I should say teams, had autonomy to determine what meeting rhythm worked for them, and each office had different social events from coffee catch-ups to office lunches, depending on the size of the office. For me, I was a member of 3 teams, and each team worked differently. With regard to our regular meetings, the executive team had monthly meetings alternating from in-person with one person dialed in from overseas to all being virtual. In addition, we had 2 3-day in-person offsites a year. My people team, who were domiciled across 6 locations, had virtual meetings 3 times a month. The Sydney and Kenya teams, which had more than one person, met for lunch every few months. And once a year, our whole team came together for a week to collaborate and socialise in person. The business ops directors met for an hour virtually each week to discuss team priorities, and we had a 2-hour face-to-face meeting every second week to collaborate. We also introduced a work from anywhere practice where our people could work for 2 to 4 weeks when they went on overseas holidays, depending on the location. So if they travelled to a country where we had an office or they had family, they could work up to 4 weeks. And our thinking behind this was if they got into trouble or needed additional support, there were some local people available to assist them. If they travelled to a country where we didn't have an office or they didn't have family, they could take up to 2 weeks. With regard to parental leave, the Foundation provided 14 weeks primary carers leave on full pay, which people could take either as full pay or half pay, in addition to the government-funded parental leave payments. So if people took 28 weeks at half pay, in addition to the 20 weeks of government-funded leave, which from the 1st of July increased to 22 weeks, people could have nearly a year of income, albeit not at their full-time rate, but at least some income during their parental leave. We encouraged our people managers to keep in touch with their teams whilst on parental leave by inviting them to social events or to come to the office for lunch with their newborns. In my team, on Monday mornings, we typically shared photos of what we did on the weekend, so our parental leavers also use this to update us on their child's development as well as their activities whilst on leave. Now, as we all know, international travel is a normal part of our roles. And whilst it may not be as regular as it was post-COVID, it's still necessary for international meetings or to have face-to-face interactions with our overseas partners and colleagues. So to support parents with children under 2 years of age, the Foundation provided travel support by covering the cost of airfare and accommodation for the child and a carer to join them on their travels, or suitable childcare facilities at home. But I should note that the Foundation only supported travel with children to countries with appropriate safety and security, and we used official government advisories as a guide when approving travel with children. Now, in addition to public holidays, there are around 49 vacation days for state schools in Australia, even more for private schools, as well as 6 staff development days. So working parents need to cover 55 vacation days a year, which is more than double the annual leave we're given, even when most international development agencies give additional bonus leave. So to support parents with kids in primary school, the Foundation also allowed for people to take carers leave to cover up to 4 staff development days, given most schools don't provide care on these days. Now, with regard to leadership opportunities, there were 3 things that we did to increase female representation. First, we had to understand the talent in our organisation and their career aspirations to ensure that women were fairly represented, including those who work part-time. Second, we needed to provide access to leadership programs and development opportunities, including for women who work part-time, and prioritise those identified as future talent. It also involved adjusting workloads to enable women to participate in these development opportunities, but I do acknowledge that this wasn't always easy. At the Foundation, we wanted to increase our number of female leaders. So for a number of years, we intentionally had over 70% representation of women on our leadership programs, including our female talent who work part-time. And where possible, our leadership programs were held during people's normal work week to enable their participation. And on the very few occasions where this couldn't be achieved, we worked with the participants and their managers to enable their participation. And finally, we needed to encourage our women, including those who work part-time, to actually apply for leadership opportunities when they arose. In our experience, a good majority were at first reluctant to take that next step given their other commitments. So it was important to acknowledge that it's hard, but equally that it is manageable. I was in a fortunate position, as Chris mentioned, as I was the first part-time senior leader at the Foundation and demonstrated that it could be done. So whilst it's not easy, we supported our people to balance their responsibilities as best they could. And I'm pleased to share that we had many internal promotions. And when I left earlier this year, 55% of our senior leaders were women, including a number who were part-time. So I've spoken about all the things we implemented at the Foundation to enable our people to manage their work and life commitments. And I'd love to say that I successfully achieved the balance I desired, but unfortunately, I actually didn't. That's not to say that I didn't have balance. I just didn't have the balance that I wanted. So thinking about my experience, my biggest learning, and this can't be understated, is that we need to be intentional, both as leaders as well as individuals, because balance doesn't come naturally. it actually requires a lot of planning and work. So I found that there's 3 things we need to do. First, create the environment to allow and empower our people to make decisions that enable them to balance their individual work and family commitments. Second, we need to coach and encourage our people to actively plan what they need to do to balance their work and family commitments, whatever balance that may be. Because if we don't, work can and will likely take over. And third, we need to be kind to ourselves. Balance will ebb and flow, and there'll be days when we feel that we're not doing the best for anyone, but it's normally not the case. We do tend to be our own biggest critics, so it's important that we support each other as well as being kind to ourselves. So I'll leave it there, and I hope you took away some ideas or validation for what you're doing in your organisations. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you very much, Jen. That's fabulous. And I'm noting that Jacinta has already said that she thinks we all want to work for Fred Hollows now. And Michelle said, let's steal all their ideas so we can have opportunities wherever we work. That's great. Thank you very much.
Well, I might, if I may, put a plug out to the ACFED HR Community of Practice. And I saw Jess was online a bit earlier. The ACFED HR Community of Practice is a forum where we come together 3 times a year to actually share what we're doing in each organisation. And historically, we've been very open to use each other's ideas and implement them locally in our own organisations, because it takes a village, as we all know, and we're all in this to make the world a better place. So that is something that we regularly do. So feel free to go back to your organisations and share what the Fred Hollows Foundation does to help your people better balance their work and family commitments.
That's great. Thank you very much. And I think that balance, I think, as you said, you have to actively plan for what you want, because otherwise, work and life will just run away with you. Okay, so let's have now a chat to Casey McCowan. Casey is the head of institutional funding at Fred Hollows Foundation. And over her 15-year career in the development sector, she's worked with ActionAid, University of Melbourne, the Victorian Government, and managing contractors of the Australian Aid Program. So a really broad background, and someone who is absolutely across all the different ways that that you try and balance. And also, Casey, of course, has taken her own maternity leave, which she will tell us about. So over to you, Casey.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris. I'd also like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land on which we're meeting. I'm calling in from the land of the Wadawurrung people down in Geelong on the Surf Coast. So yeah, I thought I'd start off just giving a little bit of a flavour of my kind of career journey and how I've ended up where I am. I currently have a little girl who's just turned 4 and another little girl who's almost about to turn 6 and who started primary school this year. I have to say the start of primary school has presented me with a whole new set of responsibilities and work I hadn't quite anticipated. And really, all of those responsibilities tend to fall to mums, I find. I've had to organise 4 costumes in the space of kind of 2 months. Constantly being sent emails about different days and things that need to be sent. So factoring all of those responsibilities into my life has also added to the workload, to be honest, that we hadn't had before. I hadn't quite anticipated that, which it's also been a joy as well. I don't want to make it sound like, it's all negative. It's been delightful to, watch my daughter, learn enter this whole new world as well. And as Jen said, having the flexibility to be able to be part of those days that I get at Hollows is, you know, something I certainly don't take for granted, to be able to go and attend, you know, the parades and the different sessions where they expect parents to be, the assemblies, is certainly something I appreciate. So I did start working with Australia and managing contractors of the Aid and Development Program. So I worked with Cardno Emerging Markets, which is now DT Global, and GRM International, which is now Palladium. I have always worked in a combination of either business development or project management, or a combination of the two. I worked in the Victorian government for a while, overseeing the partnership they had with the Timor-Leste government. They ran a capacity building program with local government there. I've worked at University of Melbourne, and then sort of for the last 10 years or so, I've worked with NGOs. So I was with ActionAid Australia and ActionAid International. And then I've been with Fred Hollows since 2015, I think I joined. And it was quite a conscious decision in some ways to move to Fred Hollows Foundation. So I knew I always wanted to have a family. But when I was at ActionAid, I didn't have a partner, and I was sort of living this lifestyle where I was traveling overseas all the time, which was quite incompatible with actually kind of meeting someone, you know, being able to develop a relationship and be in a position to have a family. So it was quite a conscious decision to move to another organization where I could perhaps have more control and not have to travel quite so much. With ActionAid, I was on the Humanitarian roster there, and I was sort of one of the only people with the skill set that I had on that roster. So I was finding I was being deployed quite a lot. So moving to Fred Hollows meant that I didn't have to travel quite so much. There was still travel involved, obviously, but not so much, and not so sort of random when I would be deployed. So yeah, whilst I was at Hollows, I think I was about 32 when I joined, and sort of really that age where I sort of wanted to have children. Jen mentioned the maternity leave that we have at Fred Hollows, the 14 weeks, but when I joined, I think it might have been 8 weeks or 6 weeks or something. It wasn't high. And one of the things, quite a few people were also having children at the same time, and the advocacy manager was also his partner was pregnant. And so collectively, we kind of mapped out what other organizations were paying for parental leave and did some internal advocacy up. And, you know, to Fred Hollows' credit, that was taken on board, and they did adapt and change the maternity leave policy accordingly to be kind of aligned with our peer organizations and best practice. So I really certainly appreciated that. As Jen mentioned, the travel policy for people who had children under 2 was certainly something that I appreciated as well. And, you know, I would certainly encourage, you know, people in organizations who don't have that to kind of look at that, you know, internal kind of collective advocacy you could potentially do as well. I think that was really great, the way we came together and did that. When I came back from maternity leave, one thing I will say, I think, you know, all of the things that Jen said really ring true. It absolutely is the case at Hollows that there is flexibility. There's a real culture of delivering however you need to deliver. You make, you know, you work the hours you need to do as long as you deliver the results, it's fine. What I would say is that is true, and it's created an enabling environment for people. But I do think a large part of it does still come down to your manager. So I've had 2 different managers while I have had my children at Hollows. My first manager, who was lovely and supportive, but he was an older gay man and didn't have the lived experience of having his own children. My manager, who I currently have now, she had 4 children. Her children are sort of grown up now. But, you know, she did have that lived experience and very much wanted to facilitate leadership and career development opportunities for women with children within her team. And so whilst I've been with her, I've been able to kind of progress up the career ladder at Fred Hollows, and not that my other manager actively wanted to hold me back, but he just didn't quite see the challenges and the need to open doors and opportunities in the way that my other manager currently does. And so I guess that's another thing to kind of consider is, you know, if you can get yourself a good manager and someone you click with, it does go a long way to be able to, you know, facilitate your career progression and being able to try and have that sort of work-life balance that you need. When I came back with my second child, I came back part-time. I think I did 3 days and then I did 4 days, and it wasn't great. Like 4 days is really a full-time job, to be honest. And then I had, you know, the Friday with my children, and it was just exhausting, and I was exhausted all the time, and I was not enjoying it, to be honest. And so I had the conversation with my manager that, you know, I can't make this work. I need to come back full time. And like I said, she had that lived experience, and she was, you know, she was excellent, really. She said, you know, we'll pay you full time. I know you put in extra hours. The Friday, you know, if you want to spend that time with your kids, or if you want to, you know, clean house, whatever you need to do, get it done and do it. So, and I was always a bit nervous about having that conversation as well. So, and probably unnecessarily so. So kind of just being frank, I suppose, about the challenges that you're facing, and yeah, being able to work out a solution with my manager to that was really good. So what I did was I came back full time. And the Fridays, and I still do it now actually, at Friday mornings I carve out, I take my girls, the one who's not at school anymore anyway, to ballet in the morning. So we have the morning together and do something nice, and then I ship her back off to childcare, and then I have Friday afternoon for myself to kind of do what I need to do. I was laughing when Jen said get a haircut, because that's something I absolutely need to do, but I haven't managed to factor the time in for that recently. But, you know, just to, you know, clean the house a bit, or, you know, do the errands you need to do, get online, do a few hours work. And I do find that works much better for me now. What else would I say? I mean, the time management thing is tricky, and across the time zones is really tricky. This is one thing I do find hard, and I still find hard. And I've almost toyed with leaving the international development sector because of this. So I manage a team. I have someone in Africa, in Nairobi. I have someone in Spain, and I also have someone I did have someone in the UK who's recently left. So in the opposite time zones, and they also have young children as well. So finding a time to connect is really challenging. And so what I do is I get online after kids have gone to bed. So, and my kids go to bed late. It's very, very annoying. I just cannot get them to sleep any earlier than, you know, 8 o'clock, 8:30. So 8:30, 9 o'clock, I log back online. I try to absolutely carve out the time between sort of 5 till that 9 o'clock time, and try to avoid meetings as far as possible. It's not always possible, but I try to, and I try to be present during those hours as much as I can. This doesn't always work, because as you mentioned, we have team meetings and we've got people in different time zone locations, and, you know, other people don't want to be getting on at 10 o'clock at night. So, you know, I do make allowances for it, but I do try to be disciplined with that. The thing that I do find suffers is my relationship, actually. So, you know, I prioritize my kids during the day, and then, you know, they're completely demanding, and their needs need to be met between that, you know, while they're awake and they're home from school and childcare before they go to bed. And then I get back online at 9:30. So there's not much time to really kind of be present with my partner often. So that is a bit of a balance as well. Trying to make that work and give everyone the attention that they need. But it works. I think the flexibility that I have from being able to make that arrangement work, and then taking off hours during the day is, yeah, certainly something that still makes it worthwhile to stay in this industry and stay with the Fred Hollows organisation. The travel thing is tricky as well. So we don't have any family support here. It's just us. So if I leave, then it's pretty much on my partner's shoulders to make it work. One thing that, you know, I do find works as best as it can for me is that, you know, when I do travel, I minimize the days that I'm away. So, and when I was talking about the previous manager I had, there was always this sort of this concept that if you went overseas, you had to maximize that time as much as possible and do as much as possible and tack on extra days to meet with other donors and do other things while you're away. So, you know, like you'd have to be away for a week at least. Whereas my new manager said, no, absolutely, you just make it work the way it needs to be work, fly in, get there in the morning, fly out after the 2-day meeting. We're fortunate at Hollows that we're well resourced and we can do that. I know it can be a struggle in organisations that maybe don't have that same resources and luxury, but it's certainly, I know for myself and another woman on the team, it's sort of one of the reasons that we've chosen to stay, because of that kind of approach and that attitude, that, you know, you make it work for you, or, you know, you bring people to you, bring them to Australia if you can't travel. So yeah, so that's been good. Yeah, I think that's sort of the main things I wanted to say. Yeah, back over to you, Chris.
Thank you. That's fabulous. And I think that really highlights the challenge of the balancing. It really is up and down. When you've got children, it doesn't just fall into place easily. So thank you for that. Okay, let's move on to Vivian. Vivian Cordy has spent the last 15 years working across the development and higher education sectors. She's worked in the areas of child protection, gender mainstreaming and human rights, lived in Colombia, worked with the United Nations Population Fund, in Cambodia with a national child rights organisation, and Bangladesh with the international NGO. Following her return to Australia, she worked with UNICEF, MSF, Engineers Without Borders, and has since moved into higher education, where she's able to straddle the development sector with programs that focus on human rights and global citizenship and foreign affairs. She's at Macquarie Uni in the Global Leadership Program and board director of WiAD, Women in Development, which is great. She has one son, hopes to have another one in the near future. Passionate advocate for women supporting women in meaningful and purposeful ways, and dismantling patriarchal systems that negatively affect women and families. So Vivian's going to talk to us about her experiences in the balancing of work and family. So over to you, Vivian.
Thanks, Chris. And I too would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the Wangal and Gadigal peoples of the Eora Nation, where I presently am, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders we have joining us here today. I'll give a really brief background as well. So I've worked overseas a lot, and I met my husband actually doing our masters here in Sydney, but he's a French citizen. He grew up actually the child of UN workers himself, and was born in South Sudan and born in country during one of his father's assignments. So I have a really interesting perspective through him as well, albeit it was a very different time in the early 80s in the aid sector. But interestingly, he and I both, obviously through our shared work, we both had worked for different UN organizations in different areas. It was actually in Bangladesh where we both had sort of made the call to say, well, how are we going to keep doing this? I had a contract first in Bangladesh. He didn't have one for 8 months. And then he got one with the UNDP, and then mine was wrapping up. So, and we had this kind of cat and mouse game, chasing each other. And, I had been offered a job in Burkina Faso. He'd been offered a job in Sudan. And we kind of got to the point where we're saying, well, what are we doing? How can we prolong this? We want to have a family at some point. This doesn't seem like a viable option. Now, it's not to say that it can't be done. It absolutely can be done. And I have friends who have done it, but not without a great deal of, I will say, struggle and sacrifice. And also very lucky couples where one works entirely remotely or things like that. So it can be done, but it's not really that straightforward. So my husband and I decided to come back to Australia to get his Australian citizenship. And we both worked for NGOs. He was working with Caritas for many years. And it was at that point where we were thinking of starting a family as well. And I said, two of us on NGO salaries living in Sydney, it's a little tricky. And I'd seen some great programs at universities more and more that were working still in this kind of development space, but had some really good support systems for parents. And so those of you who might have worked at universities or know people that work at universities, it's filled with women in their 30s because by and large, in my experience, from what I've seen, universities probably have the best enterprise agreements when it comes to parental leave. So for example, at Macquarie, I was allowed 26 weeks full pay, which I think is, I don't think it's any better than that. Not that I've seen anyway. So that was certainly a huge draw card for me wanting to plan a family, having 26 weeks full pay, which of course I took a full year at half pay, and I could return at part-time, which I did. I started off 3 days and moved up to 4, and now I'm back at full time. But it wasn't just the maternity leave pay, which was exceptional, but it was also the carers leave. And that actually ended up being more powerful and more of a benefit to me. Because those of you with young children know that first year back in daycare, you're constantly taking time off. And you're constantly having a sick child that you need to be with. And then, of course, you yourself fall ill because you've caught whatever, bug and germs they've brought back from the petri dish of daycare. So I won't say it's unlimited, but certainly extremely generous carers leave, which didn't eat into my annual leave or eat into my own sick leave, which, I took if I was ill. But having that carers leave, I had a son that had constant ear infections and we had to get him grommets. And so really having that carers leave was such a more useful than the maternity leave itself, I would say. And I really want to echo Casey, that having a manager that is supportive. And my manager, she's a mum of 2. We're a team of 5 and 4 of us are parents. And so to have a manager who deeply understands that lived experience of what it's like to be a parent, particularly a mother, having a child with either special needs or a child that has specific health issues, again, that it was just so helpful to me. And another really good piece of advice I wanted to share was the enterprise agreement. Read the enterprise agreement, read it deeply, because you'd be surprised how much is in there. It was only through that I really understood just how much carers leave I had. There was lots of different ways that I could sort of come back to work part-time, rearrange my schedule so it was flexible. And the enterprise agreement really allowed for that. So my advice I would always give when either looking for a new job, if their enterprise agreement is available publicly, which, it should be, but in most cases, read it. Or if you're in a job interview, ask to look at it, because these are such an important document that I think up until I chose to have a family, I didn't really understand its importance. And I think something like this, seeing how it's written, and then like Casey said, advocating for something better. If the enterprise agreement doesn't look so good, talk to HR, talk to your team. There are certainly ways to improve it. I'm very grateful for my 26 weeks. And obviously now with the government's, I think it's 24 weeks currently or 22 weeks currently. I think it goes up every July. Certainly that's a huge, huge help. And I'll also put out a bit of a trigger warning just around pregnancy loss. And so if you don't want to talk, please, mute yourself or step away. But I've had 2 losses in the last 8 months, 2 pregnancy losses. And so even things like having bereavement leave, having a really supportive team has been a game changer for me. And it's priceless. I mean, having my manager, having Chris as the chair of WiAD, people reaching out to me, supporting me, because pregnancy loss is still part. You are balancing grieving and work and looking after a child if you've already got a child. So it's a whole spectrum of obviously emotions. And if you care passionately about your work, which I do, I didn't want to drop that. I wanted to keep that going, but I was struggling with my own emotions as well. So it was a really trying time, and I'm still working through it. But I think having a supportive team who really, really allow you the time that you need, and an enterprise agreement that also supports that, is absolutely crucial. And so I know we don't always have the choice to have that, but where possible, it's part of the reason I've remained as long as I have with my current team, because I just can't see where I'd want to go to risk not having the same level of support. You know, Chris mentioned in my intro that I'm hoping to have a second child, and I hope that will be the case and have a successful pregnancy. But I'm not really prepared to leave, knowing that I've got such a beautiful support network with the people on my team. And so that's been my biggest driver, I think. And I love what I do, but certainly being comfortable and having that support is key. And I think as women, we often do stay in places where we have that support system, because these are such difficult times when you have a young child. But there's so many tiny things you can do as a manager. My manager's given me tomorrow afternoon off because it's my son's 3rd birthday. You know, go pick him up early from daycare. You know, and she's like, don't even put it in leave. Just go take it. You know, ad hoc, because she knows obviously that I also make up the hours at various times. You know, and I don't want to quote the study because I'm not sure of the name, but there's been countless studies on the fact that women who work part-time, and this is what you said too, Casey, you're actually really doing full-time hours, even though you might be paid for part-time. And that was part of the reason I also went up to 5 days. I found myself working full-time hours, really in the evenings, at night, on weekends even. And so it made sense for me to be back officially full-time. But it also means that when there's that flexible time of taking an hour off or picking up your kid early or whatever it happens to be, ultimately, most of us will actually do the work and then some on top of that of what we're already required to do. So the tick box of hours to me is, if you do your job and you do it well, and you know meet the outcomes that you need, being there between 9 and 5 is it's no longer, I think, a yardstick of how to measure productivity. So, and I think COVID's changed a lot of that as well. You know, I had a COVID baby, so I was at home with him. We both were at home with him the entire time. And that has really changed the game, working from home, being able to, I'm working from home today. You know, I've just put on 3 loads of, you know, little boy pants that get constantly dirty. I couldn't do that if I was at home, if I was in the office all the time. So I think flexible work now, whether you're a parent or not, I think is for most people a bit of a game changer, and we sort of expect that there's going to be flexible working arrangements for majority of work. And when it comes to working overseas, you know, I was doing a lot of field trips with work, not only with Macquarie but also with Engineers Without Borders. I was doing periodic 2-week, 3-week trips with them, and my last was in January 2020, and I was in Cambodia with Engineers Without Borders. And I specifically remember talking to my colleagues saying, this is my last trip, I'm having a baby, but I'll be back. And interestingly, I thought that I would want to go back straight away, 6 months in, put him in daycare. But I also I had postpartum anxiety. I didn't want to leave him at all. And that was unexpected. Having traveled as much as I did with my work previously, I genuinely believe that I was going to be perfectly fine with putting my child in daycare at 6 months, which again, some people are, and that's totally their prerogative. But I found I wasn't. I couldn't even spend a day without him. And that was a surprise to me. And I didn't, in fact, have a night away from him until he was over 2 years old, not one night. Now, in retrospect, maybe I could have done with a night away, but, you know, my post-pregnancy, you know, newborn, even having, you know, 1, 2, you know, toddler, it didn't go the way that I thought it would, or that the way I anticipated prior to being a mum. And I found myself turning down overseas trips because I simply just didn't want to leave him. And I have a very supportive partner who's very hands-on. You know, it's a real partnership and workload. I won't say it's an equal workload, because is it ever really equal between mum and dad? Probably not. But we do our best to make it as equal as possible. But certainly I found myself not wanting to go on overseas trips. And I've only just recently now started doing some short-term trips, 4 or 5 days here and there. And that's been fantastic. But that support system that I have with my partner and also my mum, who's not too far away, has also been a real game changer. And again, that's not unfortunately available to everybody, but it does take a village. And whether that village is not necessarily immediate family, whether it's good friends. I think in my experience, you know, we see these kind of nuclear family units now, and we're expected to be doing it on our own and working full time and making enough money to buy a house and pay our rent or pay our mortgage. And I sometimes deeply resent the situation that we find ourselves in, you know, modern women working, having it all, quote unquote, but actually this model of the nuclear system is relatively new, and I don't think it's really working either. This idea that we should be relying on aunts and cousins and sisters and brothers and friends, having a really strong friendship group with whom you can actually say, can you mind my child for a few days, and vice versa, and mind their child, and that sense of community. I think we've lost a lot of it, and I'm really trying hard with my mother's group and women in my life to not just be there as friends, but to really be there as a village for rearing children. And again, it's not always easy or possible, but it's something I'm striving to do, because I'm realizing more and more I need my girlfriends who have children, and they need me. And we need to look out for each other in a way that I think has been lost in recent times. So I won't go on too much. I'm aware that obviously when I have time for questions, but I would just say, I think lastly, to wrap up, yes, as I said, EBA, look at your enterprise agreement, really understand it when you're going for new jobs, understand what's available to you, what your rights are. And not just with maternity leave, but also, you know, with children, what kind of carers leave is on offer, etc. How much sick leave are you allowed? Trying to plan your leave. I mean, the Fred Hollows has the travel allowance for children and a care is fantastic. I'd never heard of that, and that's brilliant. It makes me want to work for Fred Hollows as well. Such a great idea, and especially under 2. I mean, they're those years that most women don't want to be separated from their babies at that age, you know. So I think that's a fantastic initiative. The support network, whether it's a mother's group or family, good friends, supportive manager, and team, obviously where possible, and that's a collective effort to also create that environment where possible as well, and be representative as well of what you hope to receive in return. So out of the 5 of us in my team, there's only one who's not a parent. She's hoping to be at some point, but she sort of looks at the 4 of us and sort of hears our daily struggles, and we talk about it, but we're very honest with her, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I think that's important too. I think we're sort of conditioned to feel like we shouldn't share our home life at work. But I actually think hearing from my boss prior to having a child, hearing from her about her, the good, the highs, and the lows with parenthood did help prepare me. Not entirely, but certainly helped prepare me. So I think where appropriate, you know, women should be talking about this and sharing. So share with each other what's happening. So yeah, that's my sort of final piece of advice, I think, is create that community at workplace where possible.
Thank you. That's really, really valuable. And thanks for sharing such personal side. I get emotional too.
Yeah, I try not to cry, but again, it's important,
It's
because
real.
we don't talk about it enough. We don't.
It's real life.
Yeah, it is.
And I was going to say that one of the things that we have, which actually helps some people, we have a knowledge centre on our website, and there we have lots of articles that have been put together, and there are some articles on supporting people through grief. So go and have a look at it. If you're a manager, it's going to come up. You need to know how to support people. So really great points there. And I would also say one of the things that I think is really important is that asking for support, creating a community. And you mentioned good friends, definitely reach out to them. I think that is so important. I didn't have kids, and I was blessed by friends who shared their children with me. Let me look after them. Let me take them for a weekend. It was great. So definitely go for those. Now, we've got a question already, and I'm hoping everybody's getting their questions sorted out. So I think this one might be a good one for Jen to start off with anyway. This is such an excellent and useful discussion. Thank you to all the speakers. Thank you, Alina. A question for the panel. Do you have advice navigating maximum term contracts which are so common in the development sector. In terms of understanding the parental leave entitlements, it's not something one might be comfortable asking about during interviews, given potential biases in the recruitment process. And Naomi added on, and also check if you can purchase additional annual leave. So let's go to Jen first and then come back to others.
Thanks, Chris. And look, at the foundation, we didn't actually have that many maximum term contracts, so I'll just put that out there. But I also think the world is changing. You know, if I go back to when I had went on parental leave and I wanted to come back part-time after the birth of my son, I was told leaders can't be part-time. And I demonstrated leaders could be part-time. So I think the society in general has been on a bit of a journey in this space. And whilst COVID had many challenges, I also think it had a few silver linings because it demonstrated people can work from home. So my advice in relation to asking these questions in the recruitment process is when you first inquire about a role, actually ask them. Say, look, you know, in the next few years, I may be thinking of having a child. I just want to understand how the organisation treats parental leave for those who are pregnant. Using the foundation as an example, we actually, just before I left, we recently hired a woman who I think was 7 months pregnant. So she joined us for a month, then went on parental leave to come back because she was the right candidate for the job. So whilst I think that is unique, I don't think it's that uncommon. So I think that's a little bit of a contradiction. But I do think that it is getting better in this space. And I would absolutely ask the question, because I would hate for someone not to start trying in the fear that they won't be able to access this. And the other piece to look at, and thanks Vivian for saying, look, the enterprise agreement, a lot of organisations are now dropping tenure as a prerequisite for parental leave. I know at the foundation we dropped it a few years ago, so you can start full pregnant in probation and still be eligible for paid parental leave for whatever the organisation offers. So I hope that's useful advice.
Yeah, that's great. Casey, any thoughts on that?
Sorry. No, I don't think I have anything further to add to that. Sorry. Sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Vivian?
I'll just add, yes, I think as all of us move through our sort of career journeys and find ourselves in leadership positions, whether we're a parent or not, I think it's really important to, it's up to us to change this, you know, and to change these systems. And so obviously, you know, there are still a lot of, you know, men or single men or perhaps men who have parents but may not have the workload. I think it's up to us as women and men, but to really drive this change. That means that if we're on the interview panel, you know, obviously we can't ask if someone's planning a pregnancy because that is illegal. But I think in ways that we can show and show our openness and show our family friendliness, or, you know, show that we are a progressive organization, whatever that happens to be, making the candidate or potential candidate, you know, understand and feel that it is a workplace that values people and people's lives and people's real lives. And so I think wherever possible, when you find yourself in a leadership position, communicating that in any way you can is really important to kind of dispel those fears, because they are real fears and they do really happen. People are still very much discriminated against, you know, women from the sort of late 20s to late 30s, early 40s, you know, people look and go, oh, they might be planning kids soon or have kids. And I think it certainly happens in other sectors. I'd like to think it doesn't happen as much in this sector, but I'm sure it can. So I think it's really up to us in leadership positions to create an environment where people shouldn't be afraid to ask those types of questions.
Sounds great. Thank you. I have questions. I'll get you either to wave your hand if I can see you, or put a click into the hands up little item. And while we're waiting, I'll just ask another question. How do you find the acceptance within organisation? Vivian, you mentioned that your team are really supportive, but I know that I've worked in teams, fortunately quite some time ago, where people were a bit resentful of people having time off and saw it as, you know, having a holiday because they go and have a baby. And we know that's definitely not the way it is. But in terms of getting support from others in the teams or dealing with any negative issues there, is that something that is still out there and comes up? Open to anyone who wants to make a comment on that one. Casey?
Genuinely, it has not been my experience at all at Fred Hollows that I can think of, that there's a perception that, you know, having children is going to impact negatively on someone's performance, or, you know, it just is genuinely accepted. I think we're probably, in my experience, where it's been more of a challenge is on my partner's side. So he works in very male dominated industry, in the construction industry. So having his workplace kind of understand the, you know, it's always up to me to, you know, go and pick up the sick kids. I am always the one who gets called. So I think, I've only had children at Fred Hollows, and I would certainly say our sector's better than other sectors, but I think there's definitely sectors out there where, you know, it's not as supportive and doesn't create as much of an enabling environment for parents having that work-life balance. And, you know, fortunately, in some ways, the sector I work in allows me to pick up the slack, I suppose. So that balance works. If we both were in workplaces where it didn't, it just wouldn't work.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
If I can jump in, I'm thrilled to hear that, Casey, because it wasn't that long ago that actually wasn't the case.
Mm-hmm.
It took intentional effort at the foundation to get to where we are today. Unfortunately, I didn't have as easy a ride because I was one of the first to do it. But over time, there has definitely been a groundswell of support and take-up within the organisation. So if you find that your organisation isn't as open, I suggest reach out to your senior female leaders who have that lived experience and ask them to champion. That would be my advice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I just want to jump in a bit like you, Casey. Like my husband now works at a university. He left the Caritas, but he's actually now entitled to lots of leave as well, as per the university. It's also about their conditioning. He's conditioned to think, I will be punished if I take time off, as opposed to me being punished by taking time off. So I think it really is about, you know, making the small changes, and that also happens just in our own circle. So instead of doing, you know, big picture, trying to get to the highest levels of a male dominated industry and changing their way of thinking, it's those dinner time conversations, I think, where we have our partners, the fathers of these children, also championing this kind of societal change and changing that social conditioning where they think that they will be punished if they take time off to look after a sick child. And I've definitely seen the change and the growth in my partner, in the way that he will advocate. And again, he's in a more supportive environment, certainly, but Caritas was very supportive. But I think, those dinner time conversations with the men in our lives can sort of, precipitate a bit of that change as well.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay. I can see you there, Jacinta. Do you want to ask your question, or shall I do it for you?
Oh, sure. Thank you to the speakers. So powerful. I know that we're talking about, our sectors are better than most, but I have a different experience because I'm at a small organization that is church-based. And if you know, some of the CAN agencies and some of these small agencies actually don't have paid parental leave, which is definitely a reason to move. But I've been advocating to leadership, but I've actually found it quite hard to find stats on what is normal in our sector. Or like, I've found is 2/3 of Australian organisations provide paid parental leave, but what is normal in our sector is harder to find. So I'm just wondering, perhaps maybe as HR professionals or leaders, you have access to that kind of information.
Mhm.
To jump in here, the Upford HR Community of Practice, we recently did a review of the participating agencies on what leave everyone offered. So if you reach out to Karen from TARE or Tessa from Mary MacKillop Foundation, they should be able to share with you what agencies are currently providing in relation to leave provisions.
Mhm.
Who was it? Sorry. Oh, perhaps I'll message
Karen,
you.
correct
I
me
can
here,
share that
Karen
afterwards
Naylor
if you
or
like.
from
Yeah,
TARE. Yeah,
yeah.
here, not TARE, sorry.
I mean, and I think like even just paid parental leave, and then we think about Fred Hollows giving a carer to go overseas with you, and so many progressive things that, yeah, there's gradients in the sector as well. But thank you.
Yeah, and if I can just add, and I think Casey alluded to this earlier, the Fred Hollows Foundation is in a privileged position of having the funds in order to do that. Even when moving from 8 weeks to 14 weeks, we needed to do cost benefit analysis to ensure that we could actually afford it. And so for those smaller agencies, I can understand why the coverage of paid parental leave, because you're basically paying for 2 people to do the one job. So yeah, it's really hard because, I'm sure that if they could provide it, they would, but giving them the information, letting them know what other agencies are doing, I think is absolutely the step in the right direction, because if they're sitting on the fence, it may be the thing that actually helps them prioritize the spending of their money in that way.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, another question. I know Michelle's note there about we need more men to be involved and to having a bigger part in making that shift for women to putting their hands up. Other questions? Well, while you're thinking, can I just ask everyone if they would be kind enough to turn on their cameras just for a second, because what we'd really love is to have a picture of everyone here, which will encourage people to come next time. That would be absolutely fantastic. And then I can actually meet my KPIs with the communications team and not get a negative on not having done this. Okay, thank you. Lovely. Elizabeth, your light is making you look like a shadow. Maybe you can sit forward a bit so you can hide the light. Perfect. Okay, Alina and Sam, if you're there. You may have moved away for a moment. Perfect. Thank you. Captured. Thank you. That's great. Now, any more questions that anyone has? Look, we will break out into breakout rooms because one of our aims, of course, is that we want to absolutely bring people together. What I will do is we'll do that in a moment. I'll just say a couple of things because we'll go into the breakout rooms. We won't come back in. So it means that you'll be able to drift away as you want to. But first of all, I want to say thank you so much to Jen, Casey and Vivian for sharing their experiences and their knowledge. Absolutely fascinating. And a couple of people have had to drop out, and all have been saying how fabulous it is. Of course, one of the things that we do is we make sure that we say thank you to our speakers in an appropriate way. And you'll see here that this is what they'll be getting, a fabulous Women in Development mug, which is, of course, a really fabulous way of marketing women in development, as everybody will look at your desk and go, wow, that I want one of those. And you can tell them all about us. Look, thank you. Absolutely fantastic. Really great. I think one of the things for me that we have to be aware of is that this is a very short space in our lives, and we have to advocate to make sure that organisations give the opportunity for parents to be with their children. So it's absolutely important, and making sure that more women can access leave is so important. The other thing that I want to say is who are we and what we do. We've got some new people here. We are absolutely focused on bringing women together, helping support women into leadership, into senior roles, going through their careers. And so our events like this one, we have completely different topics at different times, and we run 4 events a year, face-to-face, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Canberra, and there's now an Adelaide group that you can also join into. We absolutely want to make sure women can access information. I mentioned before, we have a knowledge centre on the website. Just go and dip in. If you're looking for information, you'd be surprised at how much useful stuff is there. And one of the initial things that I found when we founded Women in Development was lots of stuff in the commercial sector and the corporate sector. That's what we bring in. That's what's sitting there that goes out to other people. We also run a mentoring program, and I can see that we've got some great people here who have got big backgrounds, and we'd love you as mentors. And we're also very happy to have you as a mentee too. Feel free to look on the website, sign up. Our next program will be starting shortly. We have an observer program for those interested in governance, and we run governance workshops. So that's all good too. If you or one of your colleagues is interested, we are looking for someone to join our communications committee. We'd like someone with communications background. It's essentially 4 meetings a year to provide our communications team. Ali Kemp's here, is our current communications intern and doing a fabulous job. But just come along to those meetings, give us a bit of input, and use share their extreme knowledge. And we're also looking for a new treasurer. So if there's someone in your finance team who might be willing to, again, take on a little bit of extra work, we would love them. So thank you very much. I'm going to now get us to break into our breakout rooms. Bear with me, because I am going to always be doing this as well as I can. I'm going to do it randomly, so you could end up anywhere. Be there for as long or as short as you'd like to. I'm just going to assign you automatically. So yeah, it'll be interesting. When you get into that room, 3 things. Introduce yourself with your name, where you work or where your current focus is. You might be consulting or on maternity leave, of course. And then share your experience. Now, you may not already have taken maternity leave, but what have you seen in your organisation? What are the things that you see might help? And even if you haven't had mat leave, how can you support somebody who is taking carers leave or maternity leave? So I'm going to say thank you, everyone. I will pop up in one room, and I will say I'll assign it. I'll also let people, oh, no, I'll sign it automatically. Just text me in the text thing if there's an issue, okay? Thanks very much. Enjoy your breakout room.